Welcome back, everyone. We are here with Frode Jacobson and Matt Wolfson of OPRA. Ticker symbol is OPRA. Very excited to have you. I know Riley, who has joined alongside me, has been talking about this one for quite some time. But for many of the listeners out there who may not know a lot about OPRA, if you don't mind just giving a quick background, a brief history as how you guys came to be and a little bit more about your core business as to the foundational layer as to who you guys are. I know we'll be getting into some of the different business lines here a little bit later, but if you want to just quickly give us an introduction to OPRA, that'd be fantastic.
Sure, and yeah, thanks for having us. It's I hope I'm the first guest from Oslo, Norway.
You are.
On the podcast. Excellent. So OPRA is it's not such a known company yet, I guess, in the US, but in terms of like a consumer internet company, we have over 350 million monthly users. So we're actually quite sizable, with our biggest footprint being in emerging markets and also actually quite decent in Europe, and growing, I guess, the fastest in the US these days. We started out as a browser company in the 1990s, so sort of way back when internet was a newer thing. And we were one of the first companies in that space, probably the first company that made internet work on mobile phones in sort of the early 2000s. Sort of a step up from WAP, for those old enough to remember that, to like normal, regular websites on phones. And we've been growing since then. Big brand, high awareness in Africa is our most strategic region, for example. It's not like sometimes we get misunderstood a bit that we're not trying to like outcompete Chrome or Safari or these standard browsers that come with operating systems. But what we have sort of learned over the years, and I guess fine-tuned, is that there's definitely a market, and actually quite many markets or segments of people that would like to and enjoy to use a browser that's a bit different than the browsers made for like a global standard applicable to everyone. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, we have quite a number of different browsers sort of tailored to different use cases and different segments of the markets. And then we sort of course, we got to stand out on something, right? So we got to give people a reason to actually download and import all their favorites and sort of go through that. So it's either sort of technology-based arguments or some features that we do, or even design, or a combination of all of those things, integration of other services, etc. And I think that we've become quite good at doing that. So we've had quite good results over time in the browser business. And then on top, we use that MAU base, sort of that brand, etc., and the reach that we have to launch new products, separate apps or services within the browser on top. The most famous one is probably, it's still an emerging market-oriented product, but called OPRA News. We've got over 200 million people on a monthly basis that consume content through that platform, OPRA News, which is an AI-based sort of content platform that serves up content to each user based on sort of what we infer of their interests and etc.
Yeah, and so for that OPRA News, you guys have been doing the OPRA football, I believe. You guys are kind of tailoring something towards that. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's sort of the same technology backend. So it's just different ways to leverage that platform to create content, information experiences, let's say. So you got the OPRA News, which is sort of news oriented. Of course, if you only read sports, it will show you a lot of sports. But then we developed OPRA Football, which sort of is just a very tuned version of OPRA News on the back end, We've scaled it to over 10 million users in just a few months. And then so that taught us that was actually a quite smart thing to do. So we launched Opera Cricket, for India, and there's a few more of these.
Are you guys looking at doing this in America potentially, or all over with different sports?
I think that is a very interesting potential, at least. And so we tend to go after groups and areas where we see that we can actually provide something that becomes of demand. On the browser side, I guess the best example is Opera GX, where we didn't really lead with like privacy features or like data saving battery, all these like specific use benefits, but rather said for a PC gamer, that was how it started. This is a browser that's specially made for them, because nobody else did that, and then you can actually, so you have like technical aspects of it, of course, like limit the CPU power, limit the memory usage so that you can stream and play at the same time without glitching, design, content, like what are game releases, what are good deals on games, community, and we're building on that. I'm sure we'll get into it, but I think so both GX and is an example of sort of further segment-oriented products that we can deliver on the browser side. Opera News is sort of the biggest additional product that we've launched on top, but we've also launched several other smaller things like football, a messaging service, etc.
You guys have a lot of users, like millions and millions of users, which is exciting, right? We always look at the TAM of a market and where you guys can go, and some of that optionality that we'll get into later about some of your other segments. But specifically for the core business, talking about everyone, a lot of investors are listening to this show, so they're all thinking in their head, how do you guys make money? What does that look like from that core business? And then of course we'll get into some of those other legs as well.
We make money by driving traffic to partners, to say it simple. So we split our revenue into two broad categories: search and advertising. Search is integration of search partners like Google as a global partner, Yandex for Eastern European countries. And then if people search from the URL bar or from like a search box, etc., where we drive traffic to the partner, we collect a revenue share on their ultimate advertising of that query. So that's about half of our revenue. Used to be all our revenue, and then advertising came along, right? Which has been growing even faster. So advertising is on the browser side. It means, when you install a browser, you get some like predefined bookmarks, icons there, right? And if we put partners there, we typically collect the rev share on purchases made with a partner, or we get some fee per, relative to the traffic that we drive. And then on the content-oriented products, of course, then we can also just do completely regular native advertising, like any content platform online or any social network we do online.
All right, so you guys obviously have the core business, but also on the side, you guys do all these different things. So one of the verticals that I'm very excited about is Defi. So like, what are you guys kind of doing with this, and kind of what are your plans with this? I know it's European focused, and I know it's a way to monetize those, I think 50 million users that you guys have in Europe.
Yeah, it's so Defi is about e-commerce, it's about online shopping, and it's about people making transactions in our browsers, and then how we can sort of play a role in that. We've started it out with quite simple, it's a portal, you can find coupons, cashback deals, etc. But of course we own the entire browser, so whenever somebody makes a purchase, it's very easy for us to sort of come in and say, oh, would you like to do it in this way? And this will be about working with partners and sort of see how we can maybe take a more active role in that space. But I would say in its simplest form, it's that when we work with advertisers on the browser side, like when you install the browser, it can make sense to have like a few predefined bookmarks of, good partners, online shopping, travel, content, whatever. But you can't really like promote 200 partners in a normal browser. So by creating portals of deals or shopping or sort of customized experiences around that, then the user can actually seek it out. And then the more partners you have there, the better the user will perceive the experience, like more to choose from. So it's also a way to address, let's say, the long tail of potential advertising versus the browser user base, in a way that doesn't come across as clutter and bad software.
Yeah. So we had a question around, would you guys get into this like whole excitement around buy now, pay later type? It sounds like you guys may be more of the affiliate. So I don't know if that would be something you guys would connect to or bring this in-house more so later on, or does that come across your radar at all?
Yeah, I mean, we do have experience in the fintech space because we've incubated a company called OPay. It's the biggest. We are a shareholder, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about that too. But an original shareholder of the biggest mobile wallet provider in Nigeria. We incubated a company that does sort of credit-based, mobile credit-based services in emerging markets. But our strength is not banking. Let's say our strength is not licensed payments oriented businesses, but what we are quite good at is to create sort of the framework in which a transaction happens, and we are quite good at integrating partners and working with them. So probably our direction with Defi is more along those lines than the like hardcore financial offerings.
Got it. And then I do want to touch on like the NFT offering. So you guys recently, this is a huge amongst, I think, everyone from my generation all the way down. And who knows, really everyone is really excited about this whole NFT craze. So Trade Pro, can you talk to that a little bit, in terms of OPRA, what you guys are doing with that and any potential future plans you guys are able to share?
I would say overall, and over years, we've been very focused on creating a good experience around, let's say, Web 3.0. So to a sort of decentralized, open, blockchain-based services, etc. We've been quite early at, we support Web 3.0 in our browsers. We've had an integrated crypto wallet for a long time. And then on the NFT side, we've opened up, still quite early, right? But I would say the broader context of moving in that direction and sort of the more decentralized services, direct peer-to-peer, etc. We think it's super relevant. It's a very exciting trend for a company like us because we have that starting position that we do. And it may be even, and I know I talk very high level, but it may be even extra interesting for us just because of our emerging market footprint. That you have these sort of trustless services that people can interact with. The NFT stuff, just to get back to your question, specifically on top of the gaming browser, we have a game making platform that anyone for free can create simple games, publish them. We integrate that with the browser so that we immediately, you'll have an audience for the game. People can play it without even downloading anything within the browser and so on. And then, of course, we look then at game monetization and sort of creating experiences around that. And so for now, I would say that's the context, but it's also quite early days for us, but something that we have been looking at for some time broadly speaking, a dedicated team, and also very closely integrated with everything else that we do, because we believe in the broader direction.
Yeah, real quick too. I know Riley has a follow up on that, but I'd love to learn more about this gaming platform. So companies can actually build games on it's not like a Unity necessarily, or like a Skills where people can build games onto the platform. Or how can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's not made for companies. It's made for people. Like it's made for enthusiasts, for people that without much sort of technical knowledge, you can make a simple game. It's like 2.5D maybe, you know. It's not going to be like your big title games, but it can be these catchy, smaller, fun games. So we have a platform to make that. People can obviously then publish those games also within our gaming browser and sort of reach an audience that way. This is a relatively new thing. It's about from earlier this year, more or less, and sort of the monetization, sort of tokenization, NFT, and all of that is sort of, we're just starting to release functionality in that area these days.
Yeah, and then just real
quick.
I just want
to add to that. It's also one of the things that we're excited about with Game Maker Studio is the ability to user generate content around games. So if let's say you create a simple game, and then I could tweak it almost like the way there's modding on certain PC games, but allowing the modding of the games. So it's like kind of bring the way, Hollywood will still make the big budget movies, right? But like you're uploading your videos to YouTube. So the big video game platforms and companies will still make those AAA type titles. But why can't everyone who's out there make a simple game that maybe would be fun for you and your friends, or taking something that a friend made and you're like, I have an idea to make that game better. And instead of sending an email into the void of suggestion boxes, you can take it and just do it yourself with little technical expertise.
And so could like Trade and Pro kind of play a role into, Game Maker and these games potentially, where, you could maybe take in and out part of the game and, potentially put it on this marketplace? Or is that something that, you guys could be working on, or what?
Oh, sorry, Matt. I thought you were.
Sorry.
You were going to reply. I don't know. I don't know yet, to be honest. Like it's still quite early. We're starting there. It's going to be a huge area of focus for us, or it already is. But we haven't come out with too much specific yet beyond what you have seen, right? Because we also have to trade. We are a publicly traded company, and we scale stuff, we see what it works, and then we start, then we announce it more formally.
Can you talk a little bit about like your workplace browser? You mentioned Google Chrome is something that.
Yeah, are you guys like actually going to work on something like like a GX, but for the workplace? Is that something that you guys could potentially get into, or are you guys kind of building some other thing that's not just for GX for, Americans, I guess, something that's tailored towards us?
So our business is a very B2C oriented business. Meaning that we want to create products that the user itself wants to download. Workplace browser, for example, of course, that would require that we start dealing with whatever IT departments of companies out there, and it's a bit different model than the one we follow. For the second, so I would say I would expect us to continue to be very B2C oriented. For the second part of the question, browsers tailored for Americans, for example, it's probably Americans are not so different than Europeans. And we do actually have, as you mentioned, over 50 million Europeans on our products. Definitely not all our products are applicable for Europe or the US, but GX is a good example of a product that's really picked up a lot of speed in both North America and Europe. It was like PC gaming as it started, is sort of biggest where in more developed markets. So I think you see that. We have browsers for iOS, for high-end Android devices, but I think for a region like the US, where our initial footprint is small, it's easier to enter into the market through these very segment-oriented products. So we have gaming there, and there will be more. We have more in the works that sort of address a specific segment, which we then think will fly well both in the US and in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And how many users do you guys have on Opera GX right now?
13 million was the Q2 average.
Q3 average.
That's awesome. Yeah. And you guys just started this, I think, 2019, right? Almost 2020.
Yeah, I didn't have many users until about a year ago or so. So that and 13. It sounds like a low number relative to 350 total, but it's the highest ARPU browser we have, obviously, because it tailors to a very specific, very attractive segment, and we look at that when we decide what we will sort of spend our focus on. Mm-hmm. So already it's at about a quarter of the search revenue the company generates is from the GX browser.
Yeah. So you guys seem to be doing quite a bit, right? And sometimes that can get, I guess, maybe confusing, or there's going to kind of what you were just saying, I guess, like in terms of how you're prioritizing the different legs you guys are creating, some of that optionality within your business. Like how does one, within Opera, how do you guys choose that, almost like the roadmap of where you guys are going to be focusing?
So we start with making sure that the core is healthy, so that we always have enough people, that we always have a good enough roadmap, that the core will continue to drive growth and to sort of be a relevant product in the market. And then for the services on top, we look at where we can play to the strengths that we have, combined with where we see an opportunity. So, okay, that sounds very textbook. But for example, Opera News, we launched that product for Africa. What we saw was that there wasn't really a regional leader in sort of the media content aggregation space. And when it's AI driven, you need to have a lot of people to get the ball rolling for the product to do a good job in selecting and understanding each person and serving up the right content. So we were able to scale the product very quickly by driving it into our existing user base there. So that was a combination of the assets that we had and sort of a spot in the market. GX, of course, it plays into all our competence around the very technical fine-tuning of how to make a web browser, that most people wouldn't think about. But that combined with nobody is specifically serving the gaming segment with a browser, where these guys and girls spend so much time. So it's sort of these combinations of strengths and opportunities that we look for.
Can you talk a little bit about Lumi? I know you guys are launching, I believe in Poland is where you guys are kind of starting that off. Can you just share with our audience what Lumi is and kind of the plans, moving forward? Are you guys going to expand beyond Poland?
I mean, I would say it's a trial thing, but when you look at our products, you see typically it relates to content on what we build on top. And so Lumi is a video on demand platform that we launched in Poland, of course, tapping into our user base there and seeing if we can sort of take our content experience beyond Opera News to also video. Mm-hmm. But it's very early. We'll see if we can do something in that space that essentially attracts enough interest that it could be a viable product.
Yeah, that's a definitely an interesting one, and a major. You got Netflix, obviously you're competing against, and there's a lot of different streaming. So that I mean, if you guys can break into that, that's massive upside, I'd assume, for you guys and moving forward. I'm sure you want to see the folks there and watching before you guys start spending millions on creating all this content, of course. But
we're not the content creator. Just to clarify,
okay.
Neither on OPRA News or we are an aggregator. When it comes to Lumi, I mean, it doesn't go into our forecast. It doesn't go into our, it's an R&D project still, I would say.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to get anybody's expectations crazy. The business that we have and the business that's at scale is, we just released Q3. It's growing 50% year over year, more than that.
57, I think. Yeah, you guys are growing really well.
And it's doing really well. Of course, we are building in a lot of optionality, and like when we now talk about GX, sort of a proven thing, it was 1 out of 10 things we try, right? So Lumi will be more in the 1 out of 10, just to put things in context. But then once we find something and it works, then we scale it. Then we're not afraid to spend money on marketing it and grow and using our existing footprint to sort of spread the word.
Yeah.
So the business is growing nicely. We've guided very well for the year, and we had a few quarters where the comps didn't mean too much because advertising dried up when COVID exploded in Q2-ish last year. But now when we talk about 57% year over year growth, it's from a level that was back to pre-COVID revenue. So it's sort of like it's actually a meaningful and a real growth that we drove over the past year.
One of the verticals that I'm also really hyped about, I guess I would say, is Nanobank. It seems like it's kind of coming back. Obviously it kind of got hit pretty hard during COVID, but this is kind of in India, right? It's kind of in all these emerging countries that they definitely did get hit hard during COVID, and they're slower to come out. Like, do you guys excited about this and how they're coming out of COVID, or do you think that they're still lagging behind? What do you guys think about that?
I think the company is performing really well in the context. So, and just to add to the context, up until this point, we've talked about core OPRA, the products that we have, the business that is OPRA. And then in addition, we have ownership in 3 separate private companies. They're on our balance sheet with a value of about 400 million. And I think the analysts put more or less different breakdowns, but around that value. So that we hold. One of those 3 investments is Nanobank, and Nanobank is a provider of, it's kind of like mobile wallet oriented credit card, or like short-term credit, like a monthly, 2-week revolving or credit made for emerging markets. So it's a huge technology play in order to be able to sort of assess and identify unsecured credit in emerging markets. Is probably the highest in terms of like what potential financial risk, like you have to be pretty good and very cost efficient, because the amounts on a per user basis are so low at identifying sort of good users, making the right yes no calls, having good infrastructure in place to make that work in emerging markets. So that's what the company is in the context. And yes, I would say the company is about halfway recovered since pre-COVID levels. It was just over 50 million in Q3. I believe it was like nearly 120 million a quarter pre-COVID. It's lower now, not because of lack of demand, that's more the opposite, but it's more making sure that they operate in a cautious way, keeping a sort of looking at sort of how economies reopen up and how Nanobank then can comfortably sort of start scaling again the credit business while feeling comfortable around the exposure of the loan book, essentially.
So you were you were mentioning three other investments. Can you talk about Starmaker too? I think that one's that had some really good growth in the last year, 2 years, pretty much. Can you mention that one a little bit?
Yeah, so the two other ones are Starmaker and OPay. Starmaker is a music-oriented social platform, so it's in the content category. Also operates in mostly emerging markets like Asia, Middle East. It's a place where sort of artists can, or up and coming, let's say, and even individuals and hobby music lovers will upload content, share it, engage with their fans, get some like monetization through that, get some reward from their fans and so on. Of course, that business benefited, like many other online businesses, a lot from lockdowns and people spending more time at home. And it's really propelled into a new level in terms of size, like doubling, tripling year over year. It's a very profitable company. So I think that's another investment that we hold where we have created, pretty good returns on that capital.
Yeah, and as an investor and just looking at all these businesses, right? You need to have that foundational layer, which you guys do a great job of a lot of people, right? So you guys have the ability to get into some of this optionality of where you go take those lines of business and whatnot, right? I think it's exciting that you are trying out new things like Lumi and some of these other business lines, right? And see what sticks with that audience, right? That's what Amazon, what a lot of these companies started off doing one thing and then, checked with their audience to see what else they could potentially, get into. And so I know you guys have, I think, about $200 million cash on hand. So, with what you guys can share, is that going to, be invested in the current businesses, or do you think some of that will then obviously go out to some of these other legs? This is a question from our audience here. They wanted to know like where that will get into acquisitions or whatnot. Of course, what you can share.
No, I mean, that's obviously an asset that we have. And I think we've always been a very solid company. Like since our IPO in 2018, I think we more or less consistently carried, over $100 million of cash or equivalents. Like when we started scaling the micro lending business in emerging markets, we used our own cash for that, and we had a loan book. But so we don't really have any debt. We have nearly $200 million of cash. It means that we can execute on our strategy, and it broadens our opportunity space. I mean, because it's big relative to our market cap, right? We have a market cap of about $1 billion, and we have off that $200 million is cash. And then another, let's say 400 or a range, $300 to $400 to $500 million of value in investments that we hold as a rational investor at this point. So of course they are monetizable in theory assets that we have. We've done in the past a few rounds of share buybacks, so we're not afraid to do that, and we like that. But first and foremost, like we want to be able to execute on our strategy and seize the opportunities that we have.
So another one of our fan questions is how are you guys kind of making this push into the Metaverse and Web3 and all this stuff, and like how this can maybe influence some upside that you guys have? Like, what do you guys think for this future that, a lot of people are getting really excited about? As, Facebook also just, they changed their name to Meta. They're going in the Metaverse. Seems like everyone wants to get into this. What do you guys think?
When that happened, I wish we had maybe talked more publicly about it for as long as we've been working on it internally, because of course we really like that direction. We touched a bit on it earlier too, but sort of in the context of decentralization and sort of edge-based calculations out at the user level, then the browser becomes just more and more strategic. We were there in Web 1.0, you know, with just access and making it work on mobile phones, as I talked about. I think we've done very well in sort of the current era. We work with great partners. We've sort of found our place in that ecosystem, but then we're also a quite geeky company. We have a massive AI competence and a very big team on that, because that's how we power like Opera News and many of our other offerings. We're in GX with sort of the user created games, the NFTs that we talked about. We have the crypto wallet. So in general, we think the direction of like Metaverse and this democratization of content and access and user generation, etc., super interesting, and we are sort of building out quite a few assets that we think will be more and more relevant in that context.
You talk a little bit more, you know, you touched on some of the expansion into the US, and then, you know, the focus in Europe and Africa. I'm very excited about Africa. I feel like it's such an area of opportunity for a lot of businesses. And one of my early companies that I touched on was Jumia. And so I started to dig into Africa. I know back in the day, Facebook and Google, they were like fighting over the free internet. So clearly companies are focused there. Can you touch on just a little bit more about, you know, the strategy heading into Africa? Is there certain countries you guys maybe, you know, focused on first, or what does that look like in terms of, you know, I know big, you know, OPay is massive over there as well. So if you want to weave that in somehow as well.
The broad question, but maybe I should begin with, we've always had a balance, and I think much more balanced than most consumer internet companies, in the importance of emerging markets versus developed markets. Mm-hmm. Our revenues, it's about half and half driven by either of the two camps. And we, in general, like if I speak from a financial point of view, I like that angle a lot, because we have the very high ARPU users and we have the basis in Western markets that we see that we are big enough that if we create a good product like GX, we continue to drive growth. And in this region, you know, if we have like what a 3-4%, something like that, browser market share in Western markets like that, we're not constrained by like whether the market goes sort of installed base of PC or whatever goes up or down. We are still so small that if once we do a successful product, we can drive very meaningful, very financially attractive growth from that. And then on the emerging market side, it's of course we're much bigger footprint, you know, in nearly 280 million users probably across emerging and less developed markets. Very high underlying sort of ARPU momentum in as these markets mature more and more, and a very high awareness that we've used to launch, like we talked about before, high football. We incubated OPay, which has now become Nigeria's biggest mobile wallet service by far, doing about $3 billion a month in transactions. We created a Nanobank across emerging markets. So the size we have there has also given us sort of the opportunity to launch services that very quickly scaled. So we want to cultivate the entirety of our footprint, but still, even in Africa, it's let's say the highest end mobile browser that's growing the fastest for us. Still, the markets are quite different in terms of, you know, there's still hundreds and hundreds of millions of Africans that are not even online yet. So when you look at our portfolio, you'll see we have a lineup to sort of account for that. But wanting to we are essentially, we want to stay relevant there, and we want to use that position to scale both the browser business, which is, you know, the underlying growth is very attractive, but also these additional services that we do on top that that actually has potential, like Opera News, to become dominant on the continent.
Awesome. So kind of just wrapping up here. I know you guys reported last Thursday, I believe. Can you kind of just touch on that a little bit and like what's your forward thinking? What's your guidance for the rest of the year and for 2022?
We had a great quarter. Again, we beat our guidance both on revenue and EBITDA, and reported, as we talked about, 57% year-over-year growth, which is like a real number. It's driven by monetization gains. So we are doing better at monetizing our users. And the fact that the fastest growing geographies we have are, the US, North America, and Western Europe is sort of also contributing to the ARPU lift. But our ARPU is still only 75 cents per user per year. So we definitely still believe that we have great opportunities in that space. In terms of margins and profitability, we don't have much cost of revenue. So our gross margin is like 95%. And then we have a relatively stable OpEx space plus marketing that we in turn can turn very quickly up and very quickly down as we see opportunities. So this year we've talked about we want to really accelerate our growth, which we have, and which is sort of explaining why we can grow at this pace by investing in sales and marketing and promoting our products also in Western markets. So we've done that. We still came in with like a 12% EBITDA margin, I think it was. But we always talk about, okay, the trajectory towards a more normalized profit, because if you look at our historical and older results, you see, the business is operated in like the high 30s in terms of EBITDA margin and so on. But we have invested this year in accelerating the scale and allowing our profitability to be lower in the near term. Still, we do all of that funded by the business. So we talked about our cash position. We haven't used that for this, even though we've invested at levels that we've never done before in marketing our products. We've funded it through the operating cash flow, essentially.
Fantastic. So will we be seeing a Opera Super Bowl ad, or as you focus on the users in the US? I think that's something very exciting, to a lot of our listeners. I think we have roughly 80% of our listeners are in the US. So any exciting things that maybe we'll see here in the coming months from
I'm sure the team would be very happy to develop a nice and good I don't know, maybe Nordic dark humor oriented Super Bowl ad or something. But I think
$6 million in 30 seconds. So
yeah.
Don't worry about
I don't know how many billion-dollar market cap companies that run those. But
right.
I would say, again, going back to this sort of segment-oriented thing, just to be a bit serious, is that the good thing, for example, with the gaming browser, when you develop something for a segment, is that you don't have to run that Super Bowl ad to reach every American, because you can find those gamers in very defined spots.
Yeah.
So it means that also the marketing of segmented products becomes more effective than going on the radio or like primetime TV ads, etc. So it's quite purposeful that we go in that direction.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys both so much for joining us. Really excited to share Opera with our audience. And I think it's a very exciting future. You guys have a huge base of consumers. You guys have multiple different legs you guys are going to be getting into in a very healthy business. So super excited to see the future of Opera and where you guys can go from here. Thank you once again for joining us here at Pounding the Table.